Hi, I'm Roy Crown from Revelation Trust, and I'm so pleased that you are joining me for another episode of Gospel Entrepreneurs. In this podcast, I'll be finding out what makes Christian entrepreneurs stand out, whether they're in church, business, or community. And today, I'm thrilled to have my great friend Andy Hawthorne. We've done so much together: Festival Manchester, Soul in the City, Hope 08, and he continues to step out in being entrepreneurial with the gospel. He works for the Message Trust, and that's just some of the things that we've done together. So sit back, enjoy a conversation with my good friend Andy Hawthorne. Andy, just to get things going, before you did ministry, you were a bit entrepreneurial in some of the things you did. So it's kind of in your DNA, Andy.
Yeah, but I think so. I am definitely by nature a salesman. So when I was 19, set up a fashion business with my brother, and we grew that and built that. And it was really that business. We were doing, when I say mainly fashion accessories, then we started to do jackets and had big embroidery machines, and just grew a business in inner city Manchester, not really for any better reason. That's where we got the best grants. So we had a decent sized factory employing dozens of mainly young people, lots of young men in inner city Manchester. And the sort of history of the Message tracks back to that business, where in 1987, our theory is Lady Diana wore a pair of our braces. Braces were in fashion for women back then, and Lady Diana wore a pair, and it was the Diana effects. Next day, every girl in Britain had to have a pair. So we had orders for millions of these braces overnight. So we borrowed money off the bank, bought loads of brace machinery, employed loads of scallies from our local estate, and they were such a nightmare with vandalism and violence. And suddenly the word got out in Longsight, inner city Manchester, that here was this factory with all these cool jackets and fashion stuff. And so we were having break-ins all the time. It was chaos. And we were not most nights, but, several times a week we'd be getting calls. Yes, you've had another break-in, the alarm's going. And we'd be chasing these scallywags with our jackets across the roofs of Longsight. It was carnage.
Why did Diana have your braces? What was it about them?
I don't know, she just must have gotten. They might not even been ours, but we used to make ones very like them. And so this is what used to happen with Diana. She would go out, she'd wear to some event, some fashion item, and the next day it'd be the hottest thing. And braces, some of you may remember in the mid-'80s, were massive for women, all different types. And we used to do hundreds of different styles and so millions of them. It was just, one of those moments, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And so we employed all these lads, and particularly lads and girls, and it was really their chaotic lives, because we used to have a prayer meeting and we used to pull all the staff in at 8:30, read the Bible and pray every day. We'd get these kids coming in who just completely looked like they'd walked into an asylum or something. They just thought we were crazy, and they knew nothing of Christ. And you could tell by their lives. It says in the Psalms, we all know, how can a young man keep his way pure? And the answer is by living according to your word. And we had this massive sense that here was a completely unchurched, post-Christian community growing up on our doorstep. So we were looking for churches that could connect with them in the locality. Literally couldn't find any in 1987 in Longsight that could connect with these kids. There were one or two who were meeting, behind barbed wires with the alarms on to keep them out. So really, it was that prompted me and Simon, my brother.
So even though you run a business, the gospel is right at the heart of it, even at that very embryonic stage, Andy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I was a youth leader in the local church and would do evangelism on the side whenever possible. I made a commitment at 12, a concert by a band called The Sheep, which is such a bad name, isn't it, for a Christian band? But never really lived it until I fully came through at 17, fully surrendered everything to Jesus. I think Eric Delve came along to our church. Remember him?
Amazing. What a preacher. What a great evangelist.
Eric preaching about the cross, I was just dumb for, and that's it. So, I'm all in. And,
was that when he was at Wythenshawe?
No, I did go to the Wythenshawe one. I think it was about 2 years previous. I think Wythenshawe was like 79 and this was 77. I was 17. Eric was the Youth for Christ evangelist with you, Roy.
He was. Yeah, it was amazing. What a guy. What a model.
To hear him preach about the cross back then was like the most incredible thing. And so fully surrendered all to Jesus. But I really believe that back then God gave me not just a heart for him, but a heart for the lost. And I wanted to tell everybody about him. And I was, the youth group's evangelist. And that was my thing, really, whenever I could go into schools. And so it was natural to think, how do we use the business and the resources? And we were pretty successful back then. How do we use that for the kingdom?
Give us the transition out of business into a ministry. You couldn't do anything else, obviously. The ministry started, or did you just initiate something, Andy? What happened there?
It was all a bit mad. So we basically, myself and Simon decided we were going to write to every church in Manchester and challenge them about mission. And then we decided, we need to do something. And one afternoon at a fashion fair, we had this idea, let's book the biggest rock venue in Manchester for a week. Nobody knew us. Let's organise Manchester's biggest ever youth mission. And we had this dream going on. And I remember driving back from that fashion fair full of excitement and we're going to do this. We're going to organise this huge mission. We're going to get hundreds of churches involved and see thousands of kids want for Jesus. And then I got home and, of course, had these thoughts, you can't do that. You haven't got the money. You haven't got the resources. You haven't got the connections or the gifting. And I said, please, Lord, if you do want us to write to every church in Manchester, if you want us to book the Apollo Theatre and try and organise the biggest ever youth mission in Manchester, would you speak to me from the Bible? And my set reading for that day was an entrepreneurial verse. I was up to Isaiah 43, and we haven't left these verses in 30 plus years. They're on our wall in our main warehouse. It says, see, I'm doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? There'll be rivers in the desert and streams in the wasteland. It goes on to say, the wild animals will honour me. I knew the Lord was speaking and saying he was going to do a new thing in Manchester. And I phoned Simon up.
You employed some of those wild animals in your business.
Completely. They were. That was a great description of them. They were living like wild animals. But the Lord had designed them to speak out his praise. So we did it. We booked the Apollo for a week, organised it. It did become Manchester's biggest ever youth mission, crazily, as far as I know. And then we did it again in 89.
Andy, just tease it out a bit. So God spoke to you, but you must have put something in place, because entrepreneurs, sometimes they have a dream, but making it become a reality, you obviously had to get your butt out and do the hard graft at the same time, Andy.
Yeah, so we phoned a few mates up. I still talk about one of our core values being mates on a mission. We phoned up Mike Spratt, who headed up a big PA company, and said, would you come on a team? A guy called Barry Crompton, you may remember him. He was the music guy. A guy called Dave was a Youth for Christ, came over to seconded to us for a couple of years. And we formed a little team to pull it off. And then we started visiting churches. And back then, some of the churches were called the Manchester Mafia. Manchester was actually, 1987, a bit of a wasteland city. It was the steepest church decline, young people leaving the church in droves. Biggest church in Manchester is about 300, I think.
And so wow.
Yeah, amazing, really. And look back, wow, what God's done in those 30 plus years. And so we got a little team. We stepped out in faith. That's always a good idea. Started working with churches are always we live or die by our connection with local churches. It's down to the favour of God, because God what on earth were we thinking of? I remember these pastors, it was called ECMAR, Evangelical Council for the Manchester area. And
I remember they were a bit of a mafia. They were definitely,
That's it. So we went to see them, but we turned up in really brash suits. We didn't know. We were in the fashion business. And they said, who are these young, brash guys coming into our meeting telling us they're going to organise this massive youth mission? But there were enough godly men there, like Val Grieve and Clarence Jeffries, who said, no, we need to get behind these boys. And they did.
How old were you, Andy?
I was 27.
So 27-year-olds listening to this, you just did it, didn't you, Andy? You'd never booked the Apollo, it was a God thing that you just thought, I'm going to have a go.
It was a God thing. We obviously took godly counsel and we got in the Bible and we prayed. If you get an idea and those things line up, there's a conviction in your spirit that this is right. Of course, evangelism is always right, but on this scale, the Bible is really speaking to you and your prayer life. And then you get godly people around you and they say, yeah, we do believe it's God. Go for it, risk everything. First guy we met, or pretty much one of the first guys, said, I've had to sell 2 houses to fulfill what God said to me. I was like, oh, great, here we go. So it was a massive journey of faith. And during the build-up, 18-month build-up, braces went out of fashion as well. So suddenly we had millions of yards of elastic in our factory and all these staff. So suddenly went from making a fortune to really struggling financially. And that's a weird one, isn't it? But how much God was on it. And then somebody, Mark Pennell's my mate, said, would you come in schools with me? He's a singer. So I started doing probably half my time out of the business, driving my brother mad, going around all these inner city schools. So we would do schools work. He would then do his music. I would come on, do a bit of a rap in his last song, and all the kids were mad for it. So we then decided we were going to form a band, me and Mark, never part of the plan. And sometimes I think the entrepreneur sees those opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, you see and you milk something, God does something, but you have to run with it. And I think Worldwide Message Tribe, it was only ever meant to be an inner city schools band. But wow, God bless that. You know, I love that verse, 2 Chronicles 16, verse 9. I'm sure you know it. The eyes of the Lord range the earth, looking for a heart. That man, the Lord says, I will strongly support. And that's what God saw, I know, in 87.
And Andrew, you're always a man full of faith, but you must have some sleepless nights or something where you think, I'm really out on a limb here. The finance is tight. Everything's tight. It's not all a plain ride, is it?
No, still am. And the financial pressure has been the hardest thing, especially when God's spoken. That very first message 88, you know, we got to the other side of the mission and we still owed $6,000. I remember it clearly. And we were right up to our overdraft. Braces gone out of fashion. And we just were like, Lord, you know, we need to pay this Apollo bill today. And we've got a VAT bill to pay tomorrow. And that's it. You know, they were the last 2 bills. And we just prayed, me and my brother, days before mobile phones, walked into my house feeling like, oh, a phone rang and a woman phoned up and said, I'm an 87-year-old lady and I'd like to give you some money. I was like, what? And she said, yes, I've heard about this wonderful work you do with young people. And I had all my money in this Barlow clouds and there was a crash. And I said, if I ever get any back, I'm going to give it to the youth. And so she said, I'm going to give you £3,000. And I went round with it. I said, I'll be round in 10 minutes. I went round with a bunch of flowers, collect the check. And she actually gave us £4,000. And then the day after, we got £2,000 in the post. And it was like, wow.
But you've done that ever since. And now you're living with millions, Andy.
Yeah. So I'm sat here looking, you know, we're doing this, the biggest mission Manchester's ever seen now, Festival Manchester, 30 odd years later. And it's the same old tedious stuff.
Because we did that in Festival Manchester, where you did it again. We created something out of nothing. I was with Youth for Christ. We managed to get Mike to shut down Soul Survivor and ship the whole lot to Manchester. You've always had this kind of spirit of the big and let's just push out, as well as local and what you're doing there, Andy.
Do you remember Mike Pilavachi writing an article in Christianity magazine saying, by the time you read this, there probably won't be a Soul Survivor because we're not going to be able to pay the bills. But it's all going to be worth it to reach the loss. But of course, God, I literally, you know, had young woman came up to me on that that was message 2000. Now, obviously the faith muscle's grown. Message 2000 is a lot bigger than message 88. We had the arena for 10 nights and 11,000 kids.
Oh, it's massive.
It was massive budget. But I literally had a girl come up to me, give me an envelope, £100,000. And
what?
From her dad's trust, yeah. One of the sort of delegates, like she looks about 19. And then we had an offering and it was like insane. And like from the kids, it was like 100 and something thousand. And the money came in, but just crazy last minute flying by the seat of our pants. But God does honor faith based on the promises of God. When we've heard the Lord, when we've got that godly counsel on the back of his faithfulness, we need to keep pushing. And I think, Roy, that God's really been speaking to me through parable of the talents. And right now there's 2 choices. We can either try and hold on to what we've got, bury what we've got, protect what we've got. But if we do, we're going to lose it. Or we can step out and try and multiply it because the harvest is on. It's a unique moment in time. People are seeking the Lord. And some churches are going to desperately try and hold on to stuff and like batten up the hatches, stop the mission, try and keep the people giving.
Andy, you've never done that. I've never known you to do that. You are, I mean, you said you were a salesman, but you're an evangelist for the gospel. And you just have this spirit that people just catch. And you're now doing groceries. What's that all about, Andy? How did that come about? Give us that story.
Yeah, so that's been amazing. So at the start of lockdown, we were like so many others, like rabbit in the headlights. What do we do? Everything's shutting down. All the schools work, all the buses, all the prisons work, all the big events, everything was shutting down. And so, but on our doorstep is this huge council estate. I think it's the biggest in Europe, Wythenshawe, 110,000 people. And of course, it happened so quick that the families weren't getting their free school meals. They hadn't sorted the benefits out. It's just carnage. So they're really struggling. So we got a list of all the free school meals families in the locality and started delivering out. We delivered tens of thousands of meals out to these families. But we'd also always have a scripture and always offer prayer. And so for quite a while, I was just going out, knocking on doors, delivering food parcels.
Door to door came back in, Andy.
Yeah, it did, yeah. And it was beautiful. And we said lots of tears and lots of salvation on doorsteps. But we were scratching around to try and find food. And we went up to Wigan and saw this project with my son, actually. Sam went over to Wigan, and there was not a Christian project, but a beautiful project where they had like a grocery where it wasn't food bank. You just turn up, and for £3 you can have this many items of fruit and ambient tins, everything. You can do a proper shop basically. They have a trolley, and there was support courses and a cafe. And we came back like, we should do this. So needed. And we started getting food from
But there's the entrepreneur again. You see something and you think it's not in our place, but we need to create it.
Yeah, I'm doing a new thing. God's not run out of ideas to see the Great Commission fulfilled. He just wants some people who perceive his ideas. And when you hit on his ideas, wow, this is a God idea. And so it's a platform for the gospel. And it's feeding people, but introducing to the bread of life. I often say my job as a Christian entrepreneur is, to see the God's new thing, but also to keep mission hot and keep prayer hot. Really, that's my job description.
I remember you saying your kind of hero was the Salvation Army at their beginning, where the core was always serving the poor and the most vulnerable, but the gospel was front and center. I remember you preaching on that and putting that out there, because William Booth, Catherine Booth, they were kind of heroes of yours, weren't they, Andy?
100%. So my great-grandfather, Captain Robert Hawthorne, was first Salvation Army missionary to India. Small group of them went out and right about 1887. And you read about those days, wow. I mean, it was crazy, radical, Holy Spirit stuff amongst the poor, whole regions getting saved and crime stopping in whole regions and God pouring out his spirit, signs and wonders, all night prayer. And I feel like genuinely we have a mandate now to reinvent what they were doing. It was never the plan, but if you look at the Worldwide Message Tribe, and now we have 5 of these bands of the Message, much better than Worldwide Message Tribe, but it's the music of the charts and the nightclub, which is what the brass bands were. Never meant to be collecting money on a street corner. It was evangelism. It was the music you'd never have in church. And they had prison ministry, they had prison gate ministry, they fed the poor, they moved people to live in the slums, which is we've done, they provided jobs, they set up match factories. But Booth's thing was, first, we're a salvation movement.
So gospel front and center was the poor, but also entrepreneurial. It's just amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I love those Booth quotes. He said, we tried everything and anything to reach the poor and the lost. And if things didn't work, we threw them overboard and tried something else. They were so, I'm doing a new thing. I've got this mad video of William Booth, because he bought 2 of the world's first Model T Fords. Nobody's ever seen a motor car before. Thousands of people following behind William Booth in a Model T Ford. And he's standing up preaching as an old man with a long grey beard in the Model T Ford. I mean, so radical, so like constantly thinking, what's the new thing to reach this generation? Crazy.
And he never lost it, because his final, we're on a bit of a roll here. His final preach at the Royal Albert Hall was, we've got to go for it. We've got to go for it again, wasn't it?
I'll fight. While there's one lost sinner, while there's one lost soul, while there's one poor woman, I'll fight to the very end. I've got it on our wall here, the Message. That's it. Got to keep fighting, because my little talk tomorrow for the Message is all about God's the great reconciler. God wants to reconcile mankind, and his way of doing it is by using ordinary jokers like me and you, Roy, to just reconcile men to God. What a privilege.
And it's still front and center to you at the moment, Andy. And what would you say to someone listening? They probably look at you, you've been at it, 40 odd years, you're still going for it. they're just starting out. They look at you, maybe they see you as, wow, I could never be an Andy Hawthorne. What would you say to them, Andy? What would you kind of give them here now today?
I would say just make sure you develop, a deep personal relationship with Jesus, focus on spiritual disciplines. If you're a natural entrepreneur, get up and go at 'em kind of person, that can be the bit that, and you start doing your own ideas rather than his ideas. But the way to perceive God's ideas is through devotional walk and through prayer. And so I'm constantly testing the prayer temperature here, the message. And we're spending more and more time in prayer, seeking him. So make sure you seek the Lord, but go for it. And people look at the message and whatever, £11 million turnover and 180 staff and all these programs around the world and all this crazy stuff happening. But that, like you say, that is 30 odd years work. And it was a couple of us having a go. And I was willing to leave the business and make the sacrifice and downscale my lifestyle and just make those steps. And you look back and you think, how the heck did that happen? You keep hearing this new thing and you keep stepping out and God favors you. The amount of times God's opened doors. I mean, I remember now, way back when we had our idea for Message 88, I remember the first £1,000 check somebody sent me. He said it's £1,000. And I just couldn't believe that anybody would invest in the vision that we'd had. Now, to be honest, it has to be a £100,000 check to get me to do a lap of honour around the building. But that's what happens. Your faith muscle grows, you step out, your connections as you need it. And I know, I remember meeting Reinhard Bonnke, and he was in realms of regularly needing $1 million checks. I remember Gordon and Rachel Hickson saying to me, they helped run his ministry. She remembers the day when the $1 million check started coming, just crazy level of faith. To be honest, we are getting there, and God is introducing those people and opening doors, and it's an amazing journey. But faith breeds faith, so step out in faith. Impossible to please God without faith, but nothing's impossible for the person of faith.
No, and I think the principle's the same, isn't it, Andy? I know, but the principles is exactly the same, but we've got to really step out, be entrepreneurial more than we've ever been in the present climate. I don't think, it's a bit like your talents. I don't think this is a time to step back. This is a time for the entrepreneur to see things and just step out and do it.
Yeah, because it is a new landscape. It is out there for good and ill. We can't do church the same. We can't do mission the same. We can't just carry on same old after everything that's happened. But honestly believe this is our time if we can grasp it. If the entrepreneurs, spiritual entrepreneurs, kingdom entrepreneurs can rise up and go for it, especially go after those who don't know Jesus and go after the poor, because that's what touches his heart. And that whole parable of the talents thing felt like the Lord said, I'm going to show you what it's like to be faithful with much. And I really want that. I want to take a lot of people to heaven and do a lot of stuff for him. But what he says after that is, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of the Lord. What's the joy of the Lord? The joy of the Lord is heaven populated, isn't it? The joy of the Lord is the poor blessed, the things that touch his heart. When you're close to him, you feel it. They're the things that get you excited. And for the joy set before him, Jesus went to the cross. And when he went to the cross, he was thinking about me and you in heaven and multiple billions more who are going to be blessed through what he went through. Now, that's the most exciting bit. Let's duck and dive on the back of that. Let's work out some ways to make that known in this generation. Let's do some new stuff, and we'll fail. We dust ourselves off. We get up, we go again.
And I remember Billy Graham saying, Lord, if you can trust me to do something for you. And that was always his prayer. It was like, can you trust me? Can you trust me with millions? Can you trust me with the poor? And Andy, you've been amazing. You've been an inspiration. You are a star. What you've built, and your heart is there's still more. And this year's a big year for you, isn't it? You're still going for it even this year.
So we now have advanced groups, which is our evangelist training groups in 83 nations on earth. And by the end of this year, we'll be on half the nations, and kind of under the radar, we're just seeing these groups multiply all over the world, which is amazing. And we're launching another 12 of these groceries this year, and we're organising Manchester's biggest ever mission, like Festival Manchester in July. Plus, we're keeping everything else going. So yeah, it is a very big year for us. But what else can you do? You know, what else is worth living for?
Correct. And what a privilege, actually. I know it's got some hassle and some challenge, but what a privilege to do what we do in this context. It's amazing because we see salvation, we see people coming to faith. What a joy. There's no greater.
Yeah, of course. And that we get to do that for God. That's incredible, isn't it? So the grocery here in Wythenshawe planted a church, and I was there yesterday. We had one lady stand up, say, I came to your Christmas event and I was so broken, suicidal. I was thinking about how to kill myself. I'd stopped eating. I was down to 5 stone summer and nobody knew what to do. Nobody could get me eating. I was just so desperate. And then I preached the gospel and she came forward, gave her life to Christ. And she said, I just know some joy. And I've put 3 stone on and I've not been able to stop eating. And after that moment is like the best moment in the world. If you all had to show for 40 years is Teresa, it's worth it if you believe that forever.
Andy, we could talk forever. You've got so many stories. You and I are mates on a mission. Thanks for joining me. I'm thrilled that Andy was able to join today. Thanks, Andy.
Well, bless, mate. Cheers, Roy.
Thanks, Andy, for joining me today. As I said, I told you to be inspired and encouraged. And I pray that some of the ideas that Andy has stepped out in will just encourage you to step out in your own way and be a gospel entrepreneur. If you enjoyed Gospel Entrepreneurs today, it would be great if you were to leave a rating or a review, whether you're listening, and how to share the podcast with other entrepreneurs in your life. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with another guest. Gospel Entrepreneurs is a UCB podcast in partnership with Revelation Trust. So until next time, God bless you.